Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. Today, 4 things that you need to know about COVID. The 4 top things you need to know about COVID today, working backwards, the things we're going to get to. Number 4, it's a cult. Number 3, the numbers are inflated. Number 2, you can go in groups again. We'll get to all those. But I think the most important story of the day, we'll start with this. Number 1, it came from a lab. We'll never know for sure, but it most likely came from a lab. The truth eventually comes out with things. So it could take a lifetime for the truth to come out. And in the meantime, you're going to be called every name in the book. Some of the greatest martyrs for the truth were thrown in prison, thrown in insane asylums, kicked out of their professions, literally exiled from the city, and of course, mocked and ridiculed the entire time, name dragged through the mud. But the truth comes out, and there were people who were right all along. Oops. And no one's ever going to give you credit for being right all along either. Many times, the people who were right all along are now dead when they're finally proven right. But it is as clear as it's ever going to be that COVID started in a lab. What was a fringe conspiracy theory debunked by all major scientists last year is all but now confirmed. Now, the reason I keep putting the little qualifier on is this thing will never know the truth. We will never know the truth because the communists in China will never allow it. They'll never allow it to be confirmed. And our media will follow lockstep to the communist demands. So this is as much as we're ever going to know, but it's as much as anyone needs. This is from the Wall Street Journal. 3 researchers from China's Wuhan Institute of Virology became sick enough in November 2019 that they sought hospital care, according to previously undisclosed U.S. intelligence report. We talked last week about a lot of the top virologists around the world who are asking for a proper investigation, which there hasn't been one. And now, even Fauci himself is admitting it.
No, I'm not convinced about that. I think that we should continue to investigate what went on in China until we find out, to the best of our ability, exactly what happened. Certainly, the people who've investigated say it likely was the emergence from an animal reservoir that then infected individuals, but it could have been something else, and we need to find that out.
Wow, what a racist xenophobe he would have been called. If he said that a month ago, he would have been kicked off Twitter and Facebook. That's quite the admission coming from Fauci, because one day, the media will start asking Fauci about the money that the National Institute of Health sent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do gain-of-function experiments on coronaviruses in bats. All right? It'd be one thing if they sent money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do cancer research or what, I don't know, right? But to do specifically gain-of-function experiments on coronaviruses in bats. All right? Will Fauci ever admit his role in all of this? Well, will anyone in the media ever ask him what his role was in all of this? We're going to talk more about that tomorrow, but I want to get to the other 3, okay? So number 1 is it probably, almost certainly came from a lab. Number 2, we can gather in groups again without any fear. 2 weeks ago, this happened in Texas. It was the most attended indoor boxing match ever, pre or post-COVID. And here we are, 2 weeks later, right? It's always 2 weeks. Oh, we could do every single event going back to the Super Bowl. We could give you all the headlines of how dangerous this is. Every MSNBC, CNN clip with reporters on the scene, all masked up in their hazmat suits, with all these people back here with no masks on. It's going to be really bad. 2 weeks later, nothing. Same thing here in Texas now, lowest cases of COVID they had since COVID, and they've had days with 0 deaths. Now, we should be celebrating this. This should be amazing news. Every newspaper outlet should be like, it should be like a countdown clock, like 12 days after the event, 13 days after the event, 14 days after the event. Let's go look at the results. Oh, no spike in cases. It's amazing. We can go do things now. But no, people still scared to go outside because of our hack media. Second thing, go do things in groups. Third point to note today. about COVID. The numbers are inflated. And we'll never know the full effect of this, but I'll just give you this one part of it. 2 studies. And they wrote about this in New York Magazine. Okay, New York Magazine, not exactly known as a right-wing bastion of fringe alt-right conspiracy theories. New York Magazine. The reported number of COVID-19 hospitalizations was grossly inflated for children in California hospitals. 2 research papers published Wednesday included, that was last Wednesday. The papers, both published in the journal Hospital Pediatrics, found that pediatric hospitalizations for COVID-19 were overcounted by at least 40%. Okay? So here's the short of this. There is a massive difference between a kid in the hospital with COVID and a kid in the hospital because of COVID. Right? See the difference? Like if you have appendicitis, a kid has appendicitis, or their side hurts or whatever, and they go to the hospital, and the hospital does their COVID test as a part of any other test that they happen to give, and they're like, oh, shucks, you have COVID. They would be labeled as in the hospital because of COVID, or at least that data would be interpreted as the kid went to the hospital because of COVID. Even though they didn't go to the hospital because of COVID, they just went to the hospital and happened to have COVID, didn't even know they had COVID. They were asymptomatic, as almost every single kid is. A year and a half of telling kids they're filthy disease vectors who are going to kill grandma. Telling them they can't go outside. You may die from breathing in air. You got to walk around with a mask strapped around your face everywhere you go. I saw a mom and a dad they were alone in a park, alone on a playground. Mom, dad, 2 kids. The kids were like, I don't know, 4 and 6 or something like that. All masks up. Yesterday. Not based on any reality whatsoever. So why are people acting like this, especially with their kids? It's because of these inflated numbers. These inflated numbers were the justification for school shutdowns, canceling summer camps, canceling sports leagues, everything, you name it. And now we have proof. 2 studies, UC San Francisco, reported on in New York Magazine, okay? These are not right-wing fringe conspiracy theories, like the fact that it came from a lab. Pfft. This is now the science. We can't live in a country where everyone's living in fear and everyone's lost their dang ever-loving minds. We can't do it. You can't do it. I know people, I talk about this on the radio show all the time. And people call in, send me emails, like, Slater, what do you care if people wear masks? You can't live in a society where everyone's living in fear and has lost their minds. You can't live in a society where no one's operating based off of any rational thinking at all. We can't live like that. You got to call it out. Let me quote Glenn Greenwald here. I think we maybe played this clip last week. It was Mika Brzezinski saying that she wears a mask still after being vaccinated, which is against CDC guidance, Mika. Here's what Glenn Greenwald wrote. He said, for the last year, anyone questioning, let alone rejecting CDC WHO guidance on COVID was vilified as the anti-science crank to the point of being censored off the internet. Yet today, it's now totally common for liberals with no scientific training to go on TV and reject the new CDC guidance. I love this analysis here. This is a sociological analysis about masks. We've talked about masks as virtue signaling, and there's no doubt about that. That's why a lot of people, we've talked about, there's 3 different groups of people who wear masks. The prideful, the ones who don't want to admit they're wrong, the mentally ill, and that's what we talked about on Thursday's show. We maybe played clips from the Maury Povich show, the woman who's scared of pickles, and how the woman who's scared of pickles is like, come on, guy, lighten up with the mask already. And then the virtue signal is the cult members, right? The people who still wear masks to say, I am definitely not a Trump supporter. That's what that is. And I love this insight here. This is from Kevin Williamson. He said the use of masks as a social signifier is hardly new to the COVID-19 era. Okay, interesting. The use of masks as a social signifier is hardly new. Face coverings and head coverings have featured in the social and religious life of Muslims with hijabs and kufis, Christians with mantillas, wimples, and zucchettos. Guys, do we have examples of these different headwears? Jews with tichels and kippas, Hindus with gungats. These are all different head coverings from different religious groups. For many centuries, the head covering and face covering impulse is partially rooted in modesty, both sexual modesty and modesty before God, but also has a community building aspect. When the Sikh spiritual master, Guru Gobind Singh, ordered his male followers to forego cutting their hair and to wear turbans, he did so in order that, as he put it, his, quote, disciples will be recognized among millions. Outward signs of community and solidarity inevitably take on, to some degree, a depersonalizing role, as with the military uniform, which makes soldiers exactly what the adjective promises, makes them uniform. In our current plague years, we have rediscovered the religious veil in the COVID-19 mask. Oh, it's from Kevin Williamson in National Review. That is so good. We are, as we'll talk a little bit about in the next segment, actually, we're less religious than we've ever been before. We're more atheistic than ever before. So you have to fill that God-sized hole in your heart with something. And too many people have filled that God-sized hole with politics. And when you're in a political cult, you need somehow to show your tribal allegiance. You need to show that you're in a cult, right? And the mask is the woke left cult members' way of saying, I'm in a cult. This is my religion. This is my religious garb. This is proof of my religious devotion. That's how devoted I am to my cult, to my religion, that I'm wearing this mask. Oh, the CDC says you don't have to. I do it anyway. That's how devoted I am. It's no different than other religions who have done that for centuries. It's just the woke left covers their faces with it. It's a cult. So those are the four aspects, 4 things you need to know about COVID today. Or 4, it's a cult. Number 3, numbers are inflated. Number 2, you can gather in groups again. Go, have fun. Have fun, like everyone did yesterday watching Phil Mickelson win the PGA, right? Go, crowd around, run, jump, breathe. It's okay. And then number 1, it came from a lab. We'll talk about coming up next, the story about San Francisco closing down a bunch of Walgreens. But there's more to the root of that story. We'll tell you why they're shutting down and what this really says about our country in a second here. Let me ask you this. Do you think things in America are getting better? Do you think they're going to get better? Do you think there's going to be no more natural disasters, no more crises where everyone freaks out, even if it's for no reason at all? You think there's going to be no more civil arrests, no more riots, no hyperinflation? No, never. No stock market crashes, ever. That's what you're betting on. If you're unprepared for these things, you are betting that these things will never happen. You're on team, no bad thing will ever happen again. I don't think that's a good bet. My Patriot Supply is America's leading preparedness company. It's not only with food. I mean, they have 2,000 calorie meals, which is way more than anyone else who's copying them in the business. But they have everything: survival gear, emergency blankets, fire starters, fuel tablets, tons of water filtration options, super important. They have a 100-hour candle. It's all there. Everything's on My Patriot Supply's website. One stop, you can get all decked out and be totally, completely prepared when no one else is. We set up a special website with special deals for you, including $50 off their 4-week food supply. But there's a bunch of deals there too. Preparewiththefirst.com. Go, get what you need, be prepared, check it off your list, you're good to go. Preparewiththefirst.com. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we are going to file this next story under the category of, well, yeah, obviously. San Francisco, or I should say Walgreens, has closed 17 stores in San Francisco. Why? Well, when you find out why, your response is going to be, well, yeah, obviously. In California, back in 2014, we the people, passed it's called Prop 47. The official name was the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. And people fell for it. Such idiots. Like, oh yeah, I support the Safe Neighborhoods Act. 60% of Californians legalize shoplifting. So it's now no longer a felony if you steal less than $950 worth of stuff at a time. You tell this to people outside of California, and they're like, what are you talking about? In California, you can steal $949 worth of stuff, and if you get caught, which you won't, it's a little misdemeanor. At worst, it's a little misdemeanor. You get a ticket, you ignore it, you go on and steal $949 the next day. So people, as soon as this law passed, people started stealing $949 worth of stuff. And if you don't think criminals are smart enough to know exactly what they're doing, then you're dumber than them, which most of our politicians are. So this is from the San Francisco Chronicle. The headline's out of control. Organized crime drives San Francisco shoplifting, closing 17 Walgreens. The story starts off with a guy who for years, he's walked 2 blocks to his nearest Walgreens to pick up prescriptions for himself and things for other people who can't get out of the house, his neighbors. And the article says that changed when Walgreens, ravaged by shoplifting, closed down. Ravaged. The guy is 77. He said last time he went in, beef jerky was behind lock and key. Beef jerky was behind lock and key, which makes sense because the New York Times wrote an article about this as well. And the reporter there said the last time he was in a Walgreens in San Francisco, he was checking out and some guy walked in, grabbed a bunch of beef jerky and walked out. And the New York Times reporter said, I'm new to San Francisco. Is paying optional? Do you have, and the guy behind the counter was like, beef jerky is behind lock and key. This is the county, one of the city, they call them supervisors, city council members of the area in San Francisco. This has been out of control. The guy said, people are scared to go into these stores, seniors, people with disabilities, children. It's just happening brazenly. We can't just as a city throw up our hands and say this is okay. We have to come up with solutions. By the way, that council member is a supporter of Prop 47. He said he's proud of Prop 47. But now here he is saying, this is a problem. Like, we need a solution. We got to come up with a solution. No. We don't have to come up with a solution. We had a solution. We've developed a solution. Over thousands of years of civilization, we've developed a solution to deter theft. Took us a long time to figure out, but we finally got it down. You want to know what the solution was? If you steal something, you get arrested. If you steal, you go to jail. If you steal, you get fined. Whatever deterrent we decided, that's what we came up with. That was the solution. We already had it. But we in California, we intentionally, systematically removed the solution. And now our fearless politicians are over here looking around saying, can someone please come up with a solution to this? We need a solution. No more tough talk. We need solutions. Are you kidding me? Amazing. And they're not serious about solutions, right? We've talked about this a lot on this show. We're electing DAs, district attorneys in California, who don't press charges on people for breaking and entering. They call them crimes of poverty. There's all these different things under crimes of poverty, including carjacking. DAs won't prosecute. So if the DAs don't prosecute, the cops don't arrest. Stores don't let employees stop anyone from stealing. If heaven forbid, some guy comes in, steals a bunch of beef jerky, the employee runs out, knocks him over, and the criminal, falls, hurts his wrist, my wrist hurts, and then sues the company for $1 million. So the employees don't do anything. What did anyone think would happen? What did you think was going to happen? Of course people are going to shoplift more, and of course Walgreens and other companies and businesses were going to just bounce out of town. Who could put up with that? Now, I should note this. Does this affect the Walgreens in the nice part of San Francisco? Or California? No, never. It's only in the poor areas, which then causes that Walgreens to shut down in the poorer areas, right? It causes the stores that do stay open to charge higher prices, right? So they charge higher prices, and then the activists come in. They call it the ghetto tax. The activists come in and they complain. They're like, oh, things in these poor neighborhoods cost more money. This is outrageous. It's racist. Well, hold on. Why do you think things at these particular stores cost more money than down the street? It's because everyone's stealing everything. And then eventually these businesses go out of business, and then these activists complain about food deserts. And there's no jobs, there's no investment in these communities, there's no jobs, and there's no jobs for young people, so what do young people do? They join gangs, sell drugs, and the spiral goes deeper and deeper. Amazing. And the politicians pat themselves on the back for doing this stuff, right, for making this worse, and then act like heroes when people complain and they say, you're right, this is a big problem, we need to find solutions. Vote for me, I'll find a solution. Let's get to the root of it, though. All right, that's the basics. Let's get to the root, because it's more than just Prop 47. So let's back it up. I heard this framework from John MacArthur. It's one of my favorite preachers. He said there's 4 controls on bad behavior. There's 4. He worded it a little differently. I forget exactly how he worded it, but the essence is here. There's 4 controls on bad behavior. First is God. Second is your conscience. The third is culture. So family, community, friends, right? So culture. And the fourth check on bad behavior is the law, the police, courts, government, jail, etc. Right? In a functioning society, people don't steal things. Why? Because the first check on bad behavior is there. God. God is watching you, and it's against the 10 Commandments to steal. And as G.K. Chesterton said, if you can't live in a society that's governed by the 10 Commandments, then you're going to live in a society that's governed by the 10,000 Commandments. So you got the 10 Commandments. God, don't steal. Thou shalt not. Okay? Well, we've removed God. There's no doubt about that. So we've moved on to the second thing. What's the second check on bad behavior? Your conscience. Your conscience should tell you not to steal things. Well, Paul wrote about this thousands of years ago. He wrote about people having a calloused conscience, a wounded conscience, a seared conscience. I talk about a numbed conscience. So now people see nothing wrong with stealing anyway. Their conscience doesn't. They don't listen to it, therefore it doesn't even exist. So that's gone. God's gone, conscience is gone. So now we move to the third form of government control. Third factor. What third thing to stop bad behavior? Third thing that controls bad behavior. Your culture. Right? Family, friends, community. Right? Back in the day, not that long ago, imagine if you came home with something you stole from the store. Right? Your mom would slap you, and your dad, you'd rather be arrested than deal with your dad if you stole something as a kid. Right? And if you're older and you stole something, your friends would shun you. Your community would shame you. Everyone around you, everyone in your community would call you out for being immoral. How could you do that? What do you mean you stole it? You did the wrong thing. That's bad. And that social shame would disincentivize that bad behavior. You'd feel ashamed for stealing. And fourth, so we've eliminated that safeguard, is the word I was looking for. The final safeguard against bad behavior. So we got what? First, God, removed. Conscience, numbed. Third, culture. That doesn't exist anymore, right? The final safeguard against bad behavior is the police. Well, we just talked about DAs, police. They're not even prosecuting crimes like this. Prop 47, it's legal to steal things up to $950, right? So we've systematically eliminated every single safeguard against bad behavior. To go back to that first one about God, a new study came out from this group, and we're going to have them on the air here soon. And they do this survey every single year. So it's called like the Worldview Survey or something. They do this every year. 43% of millennials don't believe in God. 43% of millennials say there's no God. Therefore, there's no conscience. It's been numbed. It's been paralyzed over the decades. even like we now today even have like an academic rationalization of theft and shoplifting, right? Right? It's like, oh, well, these people are in poverty, so it's okay. Or, what is capitalism? Capitalism is theft. Private property is theft. So they're actually liberating the goods from the right. It's nonsense. And then even our culture, well, who are you to say that stealing is wrong, right? Who are you to say? Maybe it's not in these circumstances for these certain people, right? And then you get rid of that last safeguard of police, and now what? You get what you vote for. There's no doubt about it. Last point on police in San Francisco, there's a 75-year-old woman who was carjacked. It's entirely on video. She was in a grocery store parking lot. 75-year-old woman carjacked. Everything's on video. And the DA, Chesa Boudin, who we've talked about a lot on the show, whose parents spent their lives in prison, and he was raised by Bill Ayers of the Weather Underground. He is now the DA. He refuses to press charges against the people who did this to an innocent 75-year-old woman. Okay, that's intentional chaos in San Francisco. Theft at Walgreens in San Francisco is 4 times the average across the country. And Walgreens spends 35 times more money on security guards in San Francisco than they do anywhere else. 35 times more on security guards. And 42% of theft comes from only 12 stores in San Francisco, which is only 8% of the market share, but half of the loss come from just those 12 stores. So again, it's centralized in only certain areas. So they left, obviously. So why did it happen? The 4 controls of bad behavior have all been removed. God, conscience, culture, and police. They're all gone. What do you think was going to happen? Coming up next, we got to talk about the big Supreme Court case that they've decided to take about abortion. Our friend David Harsanyi is going to be here next to talk about that. This is a huge deal. This is potentially the law or the case that will overturn Roe v. Wade. We'll do a next true story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusader, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. Remember that, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. The Supreme Court decided to hear this case. We'll probably get a ruling at the end of the year here. This, I believe, could be the biggest reworking, to say the least, overturn, to say the most, against Roe v. Wade since Roe v. Wade back in 1973, especially with the court now, as it is, 6-3. Conservative, thanks to Donald Trump for that. I want to talk about this case. This case is a big deal. First, here's a little clip of Chris Cuomo, oddly talking about the science or saying that we're against the science or don't care about the science. Here's Chris Cuomo.
When does what is inside a woman become a person with rights under the law? You would think we would have impaneled experts on a special commission by now to see what the science says, right? But we don't seem to have the intellectual curiosity about this issue because it's not really about science. It has become a culture war. It's a political lever to use as a distraction from policy and solving problems, to allow people to get up in their religion and their righteousness over any sense of what science suggests. It's not about science or consensus. It's about dividing lines, legislating to the far right white fright vote, flooding the zone with 536 bills that abridge a woman's right to control her own body in 46 states. It's just like voting rights in one way. You see?
That's such a David Harsanyi is here from National Review. David, how are you, brother?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, really good. I'm glad you're here. That's such an interesting clip, an interesting argument, because he's saying he's right that it's not, this abortion debate's not about science anymore. Because if it were, then more people would be on the pro-life side, right? What do you make of that?
Well, there's so many levels of wrongness in what he said, in the sense that let's start off by pretending that this isn't about policy. For me, for instance, abortion is a huge policy issue. Mississippi passed a law. That was policy. the Jackson abortion clinic or whatever wanted to overturn the law. That is about policy. The Supreme Court legalized abortion in the nation and imposed its will on all the states. That's policy. So this is all about policy. And you're right as well that if it was about science, I think that their side would be losing. The thing, of course, is that the idea that government should get a bunch of scientists to sit around and make a decision for us about the morality of what abortion is something, a guy who maybe is ready to listen to whatever the state tells him, wants. But me, for instance, there's no commission's not going to change my mind on what I think the science is on abortion and what I think the morality is. And I'm not, you talked about religion. I'm an atheist, and science and reason and morality tell me that abortion is wrong.
Let's talk about that for a second. So whenever I talk about abortion, I never quote the Bible. I never bring up Corinthians. Like, that's just not, that argument doesn't, if you're not a Christian, that argument doesn't mean anything to you, right? To anyone. So I only stick with the science. As we did last week, we went through all the medical textbooks and embryology textbooks that all obviously talk about how life begins at conception. So, but as an atheist, from an atheist perspective, where does the morality against abortion come from?
Well, I believe in I'm actually quite pro-religion in a sense, so I believe in the moral structures that most religious people claim to believe in. And, I think ending the life of another human being is the least we can refrain from doing in a moral, in my moral universe. So, and more than that, taking the life of a completely defenseless human being is perhaps the worst thing we can do. And he mentions that this is a human being. He calls it a person, because that's what we're talking about. Guys like this don't want to debate the science. Actually, they want a commission to circumvent that debate. They don't want to debate the morality. They want to make it an issue about a woman's right to control her own body, even though he just said that there was another human being inside that body. So where does it come from? I guess that's a complicated question, but I think that most people can agree that taking the life of another human being is the most basic moral principle we should adhere to, or not taking the life, excuse me.
What do you make of Cuomo mentioning or saying that it is a human being and all that? Because we did another segment last week on the pro-abortion people who are intellectually honest and who do say, yeah, of course it's a life. I just think you should be allowed to kill it for all these different reasons. Like Camille Paglia is one. She's like, no, it's murder. And it's a human. Like, stop saying it's not a human. It definitely is. And Cuomo again mentioning it's a human being. What do you make of that argument from the pro-abortion people, or that stance that they hold?
It's a much more honest argument. It's very difficult to argue against. You're saying that you're okay with killing another human being, or that you don't believe that human being has agency yet, or whatever your argument is. I mean, so you're being honest. That's not what Chris Cuomo's doing. One time I spoke to Charles Murray, and he called it justifiable homicide, I believe, abortion. So that's an argument. I think it's an immoral argument. It's an argument. He's not making that argument. He's telling me that science, if there was a commission, if we only had intellectual curiosity and put together a commission to think for us, we would be told that, what would we be told? I'm not even sure when viability is. I write about that in a piece recently, but the argument for viability is terrible, because 22 weeks, I think, is the earliest, we've kept a baby alive in gestation after, premature birth. But a few years ago, that was not a technology that we had. So you're telling me that life wasn't alive then, but because we discovered technology now it is? My argument is always that, just because in the 1700s we didn't, people died of, an impacted tooth or something, doesn't mean they weren't alive simply because we didn't have the technology to save them. So that's what his argument is. It's not rational. It doesn't make much sense.
Such a good point. So it was, back in 1973, viability was 32 weeks. And today is 21 is the earliest. So that's a huge technological advancement, but no developmental differences, obviously, between humans over the last 40 plus years. What do you make of the argument I hear from the left all the time is that oh, you conservatives, you say you're pro-life, but you don't care about babies after they're born. I think that's one of their main go-to arguments is you don't support these big government things about kids once they're born. Therefore, you don't really care about babies. We do.
Even if that were true, that adds nothing to their argument, right? I mean, so what do you say? So first of all, you're conceding that it's a life that I care about before it's born. But I'd be happy to argue about the programs they believe help people after they're born. But the problem is that once you concede that it is a life that we're talking about, it is in its most defenseless state as a child, as a unborn baby. And more than that, there are almost no regulations essentially governing that, and they are at the mercy of their mother. I mean, as hard as that is to say. Chris Cuomo is arguing about viability here, but he literally doesn't believe in any kind of law to stop anyone from conception to crowning from having an abortion. I mean, he's pro-late term abortion. So I'm not understanding why they're making this viability argument, which is already the Roe v. Wade was ridiculous for the reason you just mentioned. Viability changes, doesn't change the science of or morality of a person. But Chris Cuomo is not even arguing like that we should have it at 15 weeks or 20 weeks or whatever arbitrary number he wants. I wish someone would just ask him, what law do you believe in to stop someone from having an abortion until crowning? And he would not be able to say, he'd not be able to come up with one. But of course, he never debates anyone. He just gets on there and, gives his little speeches.
Where do you think abortion will be in this country in 100 years from now, right? Fast forward, where are we? What direction are we moving in?
I don't know for sure, but I feel like we're moving in the right direction, in the life direction, because of the science, because we get to see what the baby really is with the sort of technology they have now. You can actually see that it's a life. The heartbeat that we hear, the constant technology that helps babies live longer and longer. One day, I don't know if it'll be 100 years or not. I think, and when I say this, people get angry. I think we'll look back at it as barbaric, as something akin to slavery, as something akin to genocide. I realize that it's been normalized in some ways. And in the 70s and 80s, it sort of became intertwined with a feminist argument about controlling your own body. But the argument itself is about whether it is your own body. That's the key argument. And that's the argument they don't want to have. And that's the reason that he this mishmash of stuff he came up with, about religion, about science, about policy, about, the right use, the far right and the white fright. Did you hear that part?
Yeah.
Abortion is largely in many places aimed at minority neighborhoods. In New York City, certain years there are more black babies aborted than born. That's a tragedy for the African American community and one he supports. So how could he say that? Everything is everything is racism these days, even when it has nothing to do with race at all.
David Harsanyi, go follow him, read everything he writes at the National Review. David, thanks for writing about abortion. I know a lot of people shy away from it. Unfortunately, I'm grateful you don't.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. David Harsanyi, National Review. Because I have a million things to come back with, but we got to take a break here. We're late. I'll just end you with this. The sonogram was not invented when Roe v. Wade was. It was invented, but it wasn't in widespread use when Roe v. Wade first started. We didn't even know what babies looked like inside the womb. True story. Mike Slater, by the way. Hey, Slater Crusaders, one of the themes of our show is something I learned years ago, that the 5 characteristics of life that most contribute to a satisfying and fulfilled life are curiosity, gratitude, hope, zest, and love. New book written about that first, curiosity. It's called Curiosity, and it's 12 Rules for Life, written by F.H. Buckley. Mr. Buckley, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
We have so much to talk about, but only a few minutes. So let's get through a couple of these chapters here. I like rule number 2 about taking risks. Tell us about this chapter, Buy the Beanstalk. What do you mean?
Well, the idea is, adults read that and they say, what an idiot this kid is. He trades his cow for a magic beanstalk. But the point of the story is it turns out okay for the kid. It really is a magic beanstalk, and you climb to the top and you get the pot of gold. And the message is young people should take risks, okay? And there's not enough of that, or at least we've been trying to make our kids risk-free. We're putting them in schools where they're being brainwashed with ideologies. And, the message is don't go out, don't wander out in the streets or anything like that. And that's just the opposite of what kids should be. I mean, life is just this wonderful garden. And kids in particular should experiment with all sorts of different things, right? And sometimes scrape their knees, but, get up, go on and enjoy life. And we have to emerge from, I think, the horrible year of 2020 with the riots and the politics and all of that, the COVID pandemic, and now it's springtime in 2021, and learn how to enjoy life and learn how to follow your curiosity. So that's the book, how you do it.
It definitely ties into this safetyism that Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff have written a lot about. Is we're raising kids just to be safe and coddled and protected and in every way. So we're not raising kids to take risks, but goodness, isn't that what I was? I keep thinking about it. It's a problem. I keep thinking about it from a financial perspective and from like an American perspective. Like that's what made America great, taking risks. But it's true for individuals, and it's true for not just financial things too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The financial thing is important. There's this great story about how the securities regulators in the 1970s tried to ban the sale of Apple stock because it was too risky. Yeah, that's the point, right? It was risky. And all great ideas come from people who take risks. And if people didn't occasionally do silly things, nothing of intelligence would ever be created, right? And in addition, we'd not enjoy life. We'd not learn about ourselves. We'd not learn about other people. I mean, incuriosity in some ways is the source of all evil, the root of all evil, because we're not curious about other people, how we hurt them, or how we can make them better. All right. And we don't look into ourselves. We don't ask about our own motives. That's a kind of curiosity too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also, sorry, just another one instead of financial risk is also, hey, go talk to that girl over there. Go talk to that cute girl. Take a risk. And she could be your wife one day, or not, which gets to the end of that chapter, which is accept the downside risks. But I want to ask you, instead of that, I want people to buy the book, so we're not going to go over that one, but I want to go over this last chapter. Realize that you're knocking on heaven's door. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's in a way, it's a book about boomers, okay? Because as you get older, you realize, you read the obits, and you realize, or people are passing away. And as that thought hits, for boomers, the thought will occur that, gee, this, might happen to me. And as that happens, we'll start thinking about what happens then or after, okay, if anything. And then we'll start asking the more profound questions of life, like what's it all about? What happens afterwards? And that's a gateway to religion. So one of the people I talk about a lot, Pascal, said that people who don't think about the afterlife are monsters of incuriosity, right? So all of our instincts about not just morality, but religion, I think, are based upon or start from curiosity.
Monsters of incuriosity.
Yeah.
What happens if you do? We got 30 seconds. What happens if you don't think about the afterlife? Who do you become?
Then you become boring, banal, uninteresting. You don't ask the big questions. You don't try to make sense of your life. And curiosity asks you to do that, not only to enjoy your life, but to take possession of it and make it your own. And that takes curiosity.
That's the book, Curiosity. It's 12 Rules for Life. F.H. Buckley. Frank, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we need it. Curiosity, gratitude, hope, zest, love. Let's be a curious people. So I'm grateful you're here. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.